This speech is dedicated to the memory of Dennis Paul Abrams, a Nevada man who committed suicide in 2010 at the age of 57, broke and in ill health after the job market had discarded him at age 55. His death certificate lists his last occupation. The state would not allow him to be listed as unemployed. The corruption of data makes it difficult for epidemiologists and investigative journalists to see the full impact of long-term unemployment, and I think that's deliberate. This speech is also dedicated to people around the world, from Wall Street in New York to Athens in Greece, who are protesting the predations of finance capitalism. I'm a demonetarist. Rather than looking for ways for all of us to make more money, I believe that we must end money and create the truly free world. But to create the free world, we must raise our consciousness, and that starts by asking the question, why must we pay to live on the planet we're born on? Matthew Vadum of the Capital Research Center recently wrote an article for the American Thinker in which he said, "Why are left-wing activist groups so keen on registering the poor to vote? Because they know the poor can be counted on to vote themselves more benefits by electing redistributionist politicians. Welfare recipients are particularly open to demagoguery and bribery. Registering them to vote is like handing out burglary tools to criminals. It is profoundly antisocial and un-American to empower the non-productive segments of the population to destroy the country. Encouraging those who burden society to participate in elections isn't about helping the poor, it's about helping the poor to help themselves to others' money." That is Matthew Vadum of the Capital Research Center. That's the best of a bunch of wonderful quotes by the right wing that I keep coming across every day. What I call un-American is Vadum's presumption that it should be self-evident that the productive segments of society are a better class of people. As Thomas Jefferson put it so eloquently in the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, and we know now that means women too. And of course, we haven't yet actualized that proposition, but it must be our goal. Here's how we are equal despite all of our many superficial differences. We come into this world naked and helpless from the womb of a woman. We all go through a common maturation process. We crawl before we walk before we run, etc. And rich or poor, we all die, and you cannot take it with you. He who dies with the most toys still dies. David Corton, co-founder of Yes Magazine, wrote in a blog that money is a system of power. The more our lives depend on money, the greater our subservience to those who control the creation and allocation of money. If you are subservient, then you are not equal. Some people have the power of life and death over other people by their ability to grant or deprive a person of employment, or of their willingness or not to purchase the goods or services put into the marketplace by an entrepreneur. Life or death, I'm not exaggerating. Maybe some of you have heard of Kyle Willis, the 24-year-old Cincinnati man who died of a tooth infection because he was unemployed, uninsured, and unable to afford the medication that would have saved his life. Everyone should be free to decline the labor or the goods of another person. But that freedom to decline must never threaten the life of that other. The legal definition of assault is an act that puts a reasonable person in fear for life or limb. So in a money-based economy, a layoff is an act of assault. The right wing is always blaming individuals for not trying hard enough. The more the media reports about jobs being cut, the more the right wing talks about personal responsibility. On September 16, 2011, Representative Steve King, ridiculous of Iowa, took to the House floor and spoke out against unemployment insurance. He said, "The 80 million Americans that are of working age but are simply not in the workforce need to be put to work. We can't have a nation of slackers. We've got to get this country back to work and get those people out of the slacker roles and onto the employed roles." But neither politicians, left or right, nor the media talk about the ugly truth. Our economic system allocates resources competitively, but the nature of competition itself creates losers as well as winners. Consider sports. 50% of the teams in any league, in any sport, from your neighborhood beer league to the pros, will lose on any given day. We know this before any of the games begin on any day. It doesn't matter how hard the teams try, how experienced, skilled, or disciplined they are, how well coached or managed they are, 50% will lose on any given day. Everyone plays by the rules, all the officials are perfectly honest and fair, 50% still lose. And in the so-called individual sports, such as golf or the various forms of racing, the ratio of losers to winners is much higher. It is the nature of competition. Personal responsibility does not overcome the very nature of competition. Take baseball, for example. We're now at the end of the season. There were 30 teams in the major leagues. At the end of the year, only one team will be the world champion. Now, every team wants to win the World Series, but only one will. So if success is winning the World Series, 29 out of 30 teams will fail every year. And that's a 96.66% failure rate. Now, apply that principle of competition to the job market. Getting a job is the success, not getting the job is failure. On October 21st, 2009, the New York Times published an article by Michael Luo called $13 an hour, 500 apply, one wins job. Wins. My analogy to sports is not far-fetched. One person succeeded, 499 failed. That's a 99.8% failure rate. That's worse than even trying to win the World Series. But you say, oh, that's only one job. Well, it doesn't get much better when you have multiple jobs involved. On April 19, 2011, McDonald's held its first ever National Hiring Day. The plan was to hire 50,000 workers. On April 28th, Bloomberg.net, a highly respected business website, published an article by Leslie Patton headlined, "McDonald's hires 62,000 in the U.S. event, 24% more than planned." It said, quote, "McDonald's and its franchisees hired 62,000 people in the United States after receiving more than 1 million applications." 62,000 out of 1 million is 6.2%. They said that actually more than 1 million applied. So let's just say it's 6% were hired. That means a 94% failure rate. Better chance than winning the World Series, but not by much. The story goes on to say that McDonald's spokeswoman, quote, declined to disclose how many of the jobs were full versus part-time. But that's how they hired the 24% extra. How do I know? Because any business only needs so many people. So 6% of the applicants into McDonald's got in, although for some it was only part-time. Now, McDonald's has a training program for its managers called Hamburger University. So that inspired me to look up the well-known U.S. News and World Report college rankings that gave the following acceptance rates for the fall 2010. Now remember, McDonald's is 6%, Harvard 7%, Yale 8%, Brown and Princeton 9%, Columbia 10%, Dartmouth 12%, and the University of Pennsylvania 14%. The people who applied to Ivy League colleges had a better chance of getting in than the people who applied to McDonald's. We live under a cultural imperative that everyone who has the physical and mental ability to gain employment must earn a living. Once we earn a living, aren't we already living? Or they must be supported by a job holder if they're not working outside the home, preferably in the context of the married heterosexual nuclear family. Reliance on the public is supposed to be the very last resort under the doctrine of least eligibility. That's a doctrine that goes back to the Puritan days. And that doctrine held that charity should be a less eligible choice than the meanest form of work in the community. And that doctrine still bears on modern times. In 1984, I lived in a rooming house in Indianapolis. One of the other boarders was a Vietnam vet who was out of work. And when the vet was down to his last can of tuna, he called on the Perry Township trustees for help. They sent over a social worker who looked in the cupboards and saw the can of tuna and said she could disqualify him on the grounds that he still had a single can of tuna. She didn't do that, but she made it clear that she could. Now, get this. If you went to the township trustees for help, you were supposed to have absolutely nothing and then wait 1 week for your first benefit check. That's the doctrine of least eligibility. They figure that if you know you'll go hungry for a week, you'll take any job. But at the same time, we have the competitive job system. You may want the job, you may qualify for the job, but that doesn't mean you're going to get the job. Depending on what your source is, you hear that there are anywhere from 3 to 8 people on average for every job opening right now. I applied for a part-time job last summer, which I didn't get, and I was told that they had over 80 applicants. Personal responsibility does not counter the nature of competition. So you say, well, we just have to create more jobs. Well, but businesses exist to make money, not to provide employment. Businesses only hire when they find it beneficial to their ability to make a profit. On September 9, 2011, the New York Times published an article by Motoko Rich full of reactions to Obama's jobs plan. It was headlined, "Employers Say Jobs Plan Won't Lead to Hiring Spur." In that article, a businessman named Jeffrey Braverman said, you still have to have the business need to hire. While a $4,000 credit would offset the cost of the company's lowest cost health insurance plan, he said it would not spur him to hire someone. Business demand is what drives hiring, he said. I know personally how capitalism uses unemployment for its own ends. I worked for a law book publisher called Bancroft Whitney between mid-1987 and the end of 1991. After that, I worked for the company, which by that time had been sold, as a so-called independent contractor. And why I say so-called is a story I don't have time to tell right now. I tell people that I did the work for 4.5 years in-house and for 5.5 years outhouse. At first, it was a good deal. I took my severance and I went to school full-time for a year. And I made my own work schedule. But after 3 years of outhouse work at the same rate, I inquired as to a raise because the cost of living was going up. I got back a letter saying that market reality was such that there would be no raise because there were people waiting for work who would do it at my current rate. That's why people like Matthew Vadum, who call the poor, especially welfare recipients, the non-productive segment of society, are wrong. The unemployed are performing a function that capitalism wants. They provide slack in the job market to keep a downward pressure on wages. So as the poet John Milton said, they also serve who only stand and wait. Here's another problem about job creation: advances in technology. We have a gross incompatibility between the cultural imperative of gainful employment and the reality that businesses operate to turn a profit, and part of turning a profit is lowering your production costs. Remember the McDonald's hiring that I just told you about? Well, while McDonald's was hiring in the U.S., they were experimenting with a way to cut back their workforce in Europe. On May 16, 2011, a website called Investor Place published an article by Cynthia Wilson based on information from the Financial Times of London, which is England's equivalent of the Wall Street Journal. Wilson's article was titled, "McDonald's Replaces Cashiers with Touch Screens. European Restaurants Test Self-Checkout Model." And let me quote from that article. "The move at McDonald's is similar to what many consumers experience in supermarkets, retailers, and gasoline stations that have opted for self-checkout to save on labor costs." But suppose everyone who wants a job gets one. I'm going to show you now where socialism goes off track. I have heard socialists say that a job should be a human right. Now, I admire the intent of socialists to see that everyone has income in a money-based world. But if everyone had a job, eventually they would overproduce, and then what? Ship overseas? Well, what about the other countries that are making stuff? Well, they could ship stuff here, and that's in fact what they do, at a great waste of energy, because someone can profit from the deal. But eventually people slow down or stop their buying for a time because they don't need or want all that stuff anymore. Inventories pile up. Businesses lay off workers when the inventories build up, and they wait until consumers want to buy again before they hire again. We see it most prominently in the durable goods like automobiles. How many cars can you have? Well, if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is a familiar boom and bust cycle. It is built into the system even when there's none of the Wall Street chicanery that we have been victimized by over the years. We only need so many things at a time. Most of us think it's crazy that Imelda Marcos had over 3,000 pairs of shoes. But the biggest long-term problem in creating more jobs is the drain on the world's resources, especially considering our numbers. We're supposed to reach 7 billion this October. Some people said we've reached it already. We do need to rein in our numbers, but that won't necessarily solve our economic problem. According to the search engine Wolfram Alpha, there were just over 2 billion people in the world in 1930. But given the size of our population now, it behooves us to use our resources wisely. And money does not allow it. We waste resources fueling markets so that we make money. We're told in the U.S. that the consumer demand is responsible for anywhere from 2/3 to 70% of our economic activity. We are supposed to buy stuff so that other people have jobs and make money so that they can buy stuff, so that other people have jobs and make money so that they can buy stuff, and on and on and on. In the process of keeping people buying stuff, we have fad, fashion, planned obsolescence, and the disposable society. Did we really need the pet rock, the flat cat, and new Coke? Do we need new models of cars every year? How many smartphone upgrades represent genuine innovation or just an extra bell or whistle to maintain a certain price point? iPhone 5 comes out next week. iPhone 4 is only 15 months old. The worst is planned obsolescence and the disposable society. The idea that goods can be made cheaply and they function very well for a while, but they have a relatively short lifespan, and it is cheaper to buy a new one than it is to repair the broken one. How many resources are wasted because we keep making new things to replace the broken stuff instead of making the item sturdier to begin with and more cost efficient to repair? With 7 billion people on the planet, we cannot afford a disposable society anymore. We have to make less stuff, so that's fewer jobs. You cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. Writer Edward Abbey said, "Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell." The world's monetary systems are indeed a cancer on this planet. We have developed whole industries dedicated not to providing useful things, but to making money from money. We have de-skilled and debased real work for the sake of lowering costs to help make a profit. We have replaced people with technology not for safety, but to make money. We have stinted on safety standards so as to make and save money. We have turned work, which is all around us, into a limited number of jobs. You have to understand, work does not equal jobs. And then we have invented more and more ways to eliminate people from consideration for jobs and hence for money. The latest is that there are employers who are discriminating in recruitment against the unemployed. And there are actually bills in Congress to outlaw the placement of discriminatory job ads. But you know, if the employers can't openly discriminate in this way, they'll just ignore the applications of the unemployed, all while we maintain the cultural imperative of gainful employment. Why? And last but not least, we have the unsustainable system of compound interest that demands that economics and economies grow and grow to keep up with interest payments that benefit only a tiny minority in the world at the expense of everyone else. Interest payments are the real reason the world is in the debt crisis it's in today. The higher the interest rate, the more money is put into paying for past economic activity over time, making less available for the present and future economic activity because you are paying interest to the financiers. Matthew Vadum said it is profoundly antisocial and un-American to empower the non-productive segments of the population to destroy the country. Well, he's right. But the non-productive segments of the society are not the welfare recipients. They are the damned financiers who not only fail to produce anything of real value for the country, but they inhibit the productivity of others, and they destroy the country for their own gain. How many good companies delivering real products were hurt because their suppliers would no longer accept letters of credit from their banks during the credit crunch? Do you know that the banks still are not making enough business loans because the Federal Reserve, which is as Federal Express and should be consigned to the dustbin of history, the Federal Reserve pays interest on excess reserves, and the banks would rather take these risk-free interest payments rather than risk making a loan. Who is non-productive now? So, how do we totally dismantle the financial industry worldwide and build a truly free world? Peaceful revolution. I would like to see the American students lead a peaceful revolution against the finance capitalism by organizing a mass simultaneous default on student loans. Student debt has become a larger bubble than the mortgage bubble of 2007. Their mass default, done as a deliberate political action, would be the clarion call for the rest of us to rip up those predatory mortgages and usurious credit cards and render those credit scoring agencies redundant, as the Brits would say. We would all have bad credit scores, but on our terms. And then let's see employers and landlords try to use credit ratings as the basis for a hiring or renting decision, as they are doing now. Destroy the financial industry in the United States and the rest of the world will follow. But tearing down the old system is not enough. What would we build in its place? How about lives and societies centered on personal relationships with other human beings and with nature, not on employment and consumption? Work done because of the need for the goods and services produced, and not merely to keep markets active and people busy. We must respect the diversity of humanity. That diversity will provide a variety of goods and services to choose from. People sometimes criticize my vision for the world by saying that if everything were free, only a few people would work, and they think that taking something from someone else that someone else has made without paying for it is theft. But how do you steal something that is free? Let's make it a world where work is a gift, not a duty. The critics are worrying about the wrong thing. Most people want to be useful in some way. They will want to do things because it would be boring otherwise. When we're left out of the employment system against our will, we start to feel useless and depressed, even if we have money. That's why some people get depressed when they retire. The problem right now is that the system demands that nearly everyone work while simultaneously making us ask permission to do what the society demands. Because that's really what a job application is. It is a request for permission to work. Economic activities should be peripheral and helpful to our lives, not the essence of life, not the highest expression of what it is to be human. No one, upon receiving a terminal diagnosis, ever says, "I wish I had spent more time at the office." We must also honor leisure. Leisure has had a bad reputation since the days of the Puritans. Idle hands are the devil's workshop and stuff. But today we have many illnesses due to stress from overwork. We don't have enough time for our families and friends, our bodies, minds, and souls. I used to have a poster that said, "It is not enough to be busy. The question is, what are we busy about? Are you proud of what you do? Would you do it even if you didn't need the money? Or are you working a job because you gotta pay the bills?" If your answer is the latter, I hope that as of tonight, you start asking, why must we pay to live on the planet we're born on? All change begins by questioning the status quo. Thank you.